Good afternoon. I think we can get started. We apologize for the short notice. So we know we probably aren't going to get a full crowd here today, but we will reach out to those folks that weren't able to come, see if they had questions. But we really wanted to show the stakeholder group we had talked about last time doing a briefing with our city council and planning commission on kind of where we were at with the phase 2 portion of the ordinance and some of the key kind of recommendation or elements that may be part of that ordinance. So we do have a briefing scheduled with our council tomorrow and with the planning commission on Wednesday night. And so these are just briefings. We do these a lot with projects or ordinances or different things that may be, a bit controversial, just to kind of give them a heads up of what the community has been talking about, what we've heard. And so it kind of prepares them in a briefing setting versus kind of having a first reading public hearing type of ordinance in front of them. So this is quite common. And then our plan is to hopefully take the ordinance about a month later towards the mid to end of June with both the planning commission in June. So this is not kind of the end all be all of the ordinance tomorrow. It's just to kind of give them a briefing of where we're at and some of the key recommendations that have kind of been drawn up. But there is still kind of some engagement that will occur as part of this process. So with that, I'll start the presentation. I'll be turning it over to Eric kind of midway through. And everyone should have received that. It was in their appointment. If you wanted to have that opened up. But I'd be going through the same exact presentation that was attached to the appointment. So for tomorrow, this is the agenda of the briefing here. We'll be going through these different items. We'll be quickly going through the team that's been involved in working on this part. Some of the current, just kind of a review for council, some of the existing STR regulations that are in place now. Some of the activities that have been in place that we've conducted over the last year related to short-term rentals. Talk a little bit about the process of these meetings, along with some of the other things we've done with the project website and the ability for the public to provide some feedback. Some of the phase 1 highlights, the phase 2 recommendations, different options that could be considered, and then finally next steps. So I know we've kind of shown this slide a few different times, but we're just going to orient the council to all the players that involved. Obviously, this is an issue that covers multiple different departments here at the city. And then we're just, Eric has obviously been involved in helping create some of these draft ordinances so far. So again, you've seen this slide several times now, but just a refresher for the council and more for any of the people that would be in the audience that would be watching, just talk a little bit about short-term rentals in general. And of course, within our Unified Development Code, we've talked about this quite a bit, that in single-family zoning districts, we have a provision that we require all leases to be 30 days or more. So that's what prevents those from going in short single-family neighborhoods today. Some cities don't have that particular language. We do. So that has been kind of the code that we've utilized in determining if you can or can't do them. And so that same provision does not exist in any of the other zoning districts. So by being silent in those other districts, it's allowed. So that short-term rentals are pretty much or are allowed in all commercial and multifamily zoning districts. And so here's just a summary of some of the activities this last year. We did a briefing with council back in the summer, again in December. This last January, we had, that was the phase 1 registration ordinance that was passed. And then with that passing, they selected March 15th as the effective date for North Padre Island and Flower Bluff that they needed to be registered. And we've obviously had our stakeholder groups meetings for the most part, bi-weekly since February. And the last 2 months here, we've been developing some draft ordinance ideas and concepts. We're going to tell a little bit about the group. It started off, I think we had 13 initially, and then we've added a couple members to the group to be a little more equitable across different, adding some more neighborhood input as part of the larger group. Again, we had our first meeting in February. This will be our 6th meeting today. We've talked about the idea of types or tiers. Most cities have those in place that do have an ordinance in place. We talked a little bit about what areas should be excluded. Do we have any area development plan areas that should not permit STR use at all? And then we talked a little bit about best practices from across Texas, and what options may work here in Corpus Christi. And just going back to basically January 11th and kind of why we're here. And during that meeting, we adopted the phase 1 ordinance, but we also talked to council about the phase 2 process. And part of that phase 1 ordinance said that the rest of the city would be required to register by July 11th. So we've kind of been working that with the deadline in order to complete the phase 2. So we would have everything in place, and everywhere else, once the ordinance was adopted, the direction would be clear as to who needed to register and who didn't for that July 11th date. So that's what we've been working towards, and we are on track right now to do that. And so I just wanted to make everyone aware that's just a next step slide here, that we worked with our council, and that process and that timing was really set with that July 11th date. Had the 6 meetings with the group, and then we did create a project website, which we've talked about. And so we've had all of the documents and information that we've talked about up on that page. The public has been able to get on there and log into our previous 5 meetings. We have an email address that we've been getting quite a bit of public comment back on. In fact, we've updated that document here today. So I think it's a split issue, and I think most cities have found that in dealing with this, and that it's kind of a 50-50. Right now, I think we're at 27 in support of and 21 opposed to, and there's not necessarily anyone in the middle. It's either you're all for it everywhere, or for the most part, you don't want it at all in any neighborhood. So there's not a whole lot of gray in between comment and feedback that we're getting. It's pretty one-sided, which is common. I think most cities have found that to be the case. And then, of course, once we have a draft of the ordinance, and we're going to create a little video summary. We've done that with a couple other city-type projects. We're going to have that on there, 2 or 3 minute video that kind of summarizes the proposed ordinance that we've in place. We're going to put that on our project website as well. This is just a map that was created. This is some of the discussion we had, just highlighting, the areas to be excluded. One obviously was one that came up was the island, all RS6 zoned areas on the island, and so we've got quite a bit about that as well.
Yep. About that.
And we are going to highlight the phase 1. This was adopted that January 11th, and so we required those in Flower Bluff and North Padre Island to be registered by March 15th. Unfortunately, I do have a new number. I forget it at the moment, but as of last Monday, it was 842 permits have been issued so far, and we really covered quite a bit in this phase 1. So a lot of the general standards and life safety elements were covered within the phase 1. So we haven't really had to talk too much about that. Smoke detectors, fire alarms, parking, trash, noise and life safety, all those types of things covered in that phase 1. So we're actually in pretty good shape with all the things that were done as part of that. And so phase 2 has been really just left to looking at single family, those requirements. So I think this next slide, I'm going to pass it over to Eric. He's going to go through some of the phase 2 work.
Obviously, you all have been, thanks for being here this afternoon. You all have been involved in this phase 2 process, obviously. But we're going to present to the City Council and P&Z that we've evaluated the single family areas across the city, as Dan mentioned, and showed some areas that could likely be excluded from the ordinance. And then the other areas we've looked at and methodologies within the ordinance that would maintain the integrity of the neighborhoods. Some of the key elements that we're proposing and looking at, next slide, Dan, would be the creation of the STR types to establish rules for owner occupied versus just a owner not being present and the entire house, the residential house, being rented out. Almost all cities that we evaluated in the best practices and looked across Texas and in fact across the country have implemented basically either two or three types with different rules for each type. We also look at establishing a density or percentage limitation restrictions on primarily, you'll see in a second, on type 2 and the definition of what that is. And then on North Padre Island, options to exclude that area from STR use at all. And then if someone comes in and wants to have an exception to what the established ordinance rules are, they'd have a process to be able to go through that. I'll describe that a little bit more here in a second on the next few slides. So we're proposing and recommending that there's tiers or two types of STR units. Type 1 would be owner or leasee occupied, where the owner is on the property, lives on the property full time, and they rent out a portion of the house, secondary unit or something like that. But the key thing on this one is that it is owner occupied and the owner is there all the time. 2 would be an owner or leasee does not occupy the property as a primary residence and leases and rents out a portion or all of the unit typically. Most cities within Texas have opted to go with the tier 1, tier 2. Some have tier 3, but then that starts pulling in just different zoning classifications of duplexes and townhomes type things. The other thing we're looking at proposing is the type 1 unit occupied, or the density of the two types of units that could occur. Type 1 would be owner occupied. There's no restriction. So on a block face, which is one side of a street, whatever length it might be, would be unlimited as long as it's owner occupied. The type 2 units would be regulated to a maximum of 15% of the block face. And so you kind of see on there the math. Generally, if you had 12 homes per block face times 15%, you'd have 1.8. So we discussed rounding that up. So you'd have 2 per that block face. It's kind of in this illustration here on the units that you could have of type 2. There could be more than 2 units, just that only 2 of those units would be the type 2 that are not owner occupied. And then there's just one more example of some neighborhoods within Corpus Christi that if you did the calculation of what a block face and then the percentage where and how many of those would occur type 2 in those different types of scenarios. Just trying to look at it and see that it stays equitable across the board as much as possible on different types of lot and block configurations. And then the next slide is another example of a little higher density, smaller lot subdivision and what that might look like using the 15%. The next slide is just something we kind of put together. There's many more than this, but these are some primary ones that had similar characteristics. So I believe we showed this at our last meeting as well. So we'll be showing this to council and P&Z as just some cross examples of some sample municipalities that have STR ordinances in place and have been operating with them for a few years or more now. Slide is dealing specifically with North Padre Island, since it's been obviously a large discussion topic through this whole process. I'm suggesting that we exclude all the single-family zoned areas, or RS6, on North Padre Island from being allowed to operate STR uses at this time. And then all new single-family development would still have the ability to include language within the planned development or PUDs that would allow for STRs in that project. And this is just the recommendation that staff and myself are making at this point in time. If obviously the ordinance, once adopted, it's a living document, go back and look at it whenever necessary on different items that we're proposing within it right now. It can be changed. And again, I mentioned the special exception process. We discussed that, most people can come in and get a zoning variance of some sort or request that zoning variance. So the same process would occur here, that if someone came in and there was already the short-term rentals that already met the maximum type 2, but someone else wants to come in and try to do a type 2, they could come in and ask for zoning board of adjustment to allow that. Everyone within the 200-foot radius as typical in a zoning notification will be notified since they're the most impacted by it and come and speak for or against that request. And the zoning board of adjustment would determine whether it would be allowed or not. Any questions on any of that or discussion?
Yes, so just clarifying, you guys at this point are saying no short-term rentals on North Padre Island in a single-family zone, except you can apply for this special exception, or you're just giving an overview still?
But I guess as far as the special exception goes, I guess that could be an option. I don't know that the plan would be to allow for that exception to be available to North Padre Island because it would be excluded. Do you have any thoughts on if that would be an eligible item?
Is that for a question for me, Dan? I think South Padre Island at this point in time is excluded. But I guess we'd have to ask, Buck and flush that out a little bit more if they could come and ask for an exception there too. But my thought was at this point in time, it'd be excluded altogether from having STRs.
And then Flower Bluff is no longer, like, you just said North Padre Island, so we're not talking about Flower Bluff anymore?
Yeah, in fact, most of the feedback that we've gotten is in support of STR use within Flower Bluff.
Okay.
And so it's just been discussion here internally is really just surrounded just one or two
Right.
blocks, really just a very small subdivision in Flower Bluff.
Yeah, I was just clarifying. Okay.
Dan, this is Marvin Jones. May I make a comment? On your map, page 8, where you have outlined the R6 on the island. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There are areas within that map that are multifamily that you didn't mark. So just to bring that to your attention, we don't have any objection here about short-term rentals in the multifamily. For example, on North Cabana, you've got quite a few. And then up on the very far north side there's the resorts up there and several other multifamily units. So if you want to sit down sometime and revisit this map, I'd be glad to bring our map along and make note of where those are.
Yeah, no, I have, and this map was more kind of general discussion about just, I was identifying the three major areas, but yeah, I know that there's some additional multifamily here towards the north on one of these canal lots.
Yeah, I
And
just,
that's Palmyra
I
has.
didn't want you or others to think that the entire section here was excluded from R6. I mean, excluding short-term rentals. There are multi-units that are certainly capable of dealing with short-term rentals.
Sure, yeah, there's obviously identified this orange polygon here in the middle. That for the most part, that's where a lot are located.
Yes,
today.
that's correct.
Hey, Dan, real quick, on the special exception process, would that be similar to requesting a variance or a zoning variance?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and so are we aware how successful that was for people? Because from my understanding, in the past couple of years, anyone who has requested that was denied.
This would be obviously a unique kind of situation. We're calling a special exception, not a variance. So there's a bit of a difference in some of the rules that may apply and the kind of the threshold of proof in some of those scenarios. But I know in San Antonio, they one city that we've kind of looked at some of the appeal process. I don't think they actually had all that many. But I think if you make a case and your neighborhood is supportive, then generally I think the board is generally going to approve most of these cases. So, this is, I think, obviously the percentages to kind of spread them out and not saturate them maybe in one place. But if there's a neighborhood or an area that makes sense where a lot should be located, then I think the board can take that into consideration in their process, evaluate, and look at that. But of course, the neighbors on the street will be a big part of that as well.
Sure. And so it's the board that gives final approval, or is city council involved with that as well?
No, right now our proposal is just the zoning board of adjustment.
And I'll let the committee know as we did some research on other communities. Some communities allow special uses or exceptions to this through the planning department itself, but we didn't feel like that raises too many questions or concerns of impartiality and those types of things, and not enough is looked at that level. So most of them do go to the zoning board of adjustments of some sort.
Hey, Dan, can I jump in there? This is Peter and Eric as well. So that's an interesting question that one of the stakeholder members raised or point, and I hadn't thought it to that point until the issue was raised. But on the island where we would ban short-term rentals in the RS6 area, we would be saying at this point that even the Board of Adjustments wouldn't be kind of an appeals process. With that, and Buck probably needs to weigh in terms of equity, you know, or.
I think that for the island, potentially, it could go through the city council as sort of a special permit. It'd be a zoning change, so it'd be just a different route than the density ZBA review.
What would be the zoning change?
It'd be a special permit to allow the STR.
Okay, so is that what we're saying, that the Board of Adjustments process wouldn't be used for the island where they're prohibited, but rather there'd be a city council special permit?
Correct.
Who made that? Did we just make that up right now, or is that something?
That's a potential.
Potential. Okay.
If you prohibit the R6 on the island, then that would be the potential.
Okay. I personally, I would be okay with the DBA because they're going to have to weigh heavily on the input from the surrounding 200-foot radius. And but I don't know, the stakeholders maybe that live at the island could give us some input this afternoon would be helpful. This is the reason we're confident in the recommendation to prohibit short-term rentals of the RS6 on the island because of what we've heard, both from what we've seen prior to this work being done and what we've heard with this work group. But we have to say something tomorrow, Dan, to right at the council meeting. We should actually have it on the slide, what we're going to be recommending, but.
Well, there was I don't know if it was about 6 months to a year ago, there was a zoning case on the island to allow basically short-term rental. And it was not successful. I don't recall what zoning district they were requesting the change to, but.
Yeah, right. I went to that planning commission meeting and it was unanimously denied with a lot of opposition, but that's why I think the zoning board of adjustment would have similar input. I don't think anything would really get approved, but at least it's a process of somebody, or there could be one street. Like I had a council member tell me, if you have one street where everybody's in favor of it, then the kind of the peer review, the kind of the public input process would prevail. Where if in the 200-foot radius, everybody's supportive of it, then what would be the issue, you know? But I don't know.
I believe what you're talking about was a bed and breakfast that was resoundingly voted down. Both the planning commission, I think, approved it, but it got the city council on it was a unanimous vote against it. I think that's what you're referring to, bed and breakfast.
Right.
I don't
And
believe
so-
Marvin, what's your thought on the appeals process then for the island at RS6? Would it be a city council special permit, or would the Board of Adjustments Would you favor using it or not using it?
Well, I would favor taking it to the city council and making the council make a second permit or a special dispensation, if you will. The elected officials are always more interesting to deal with than appointees.
Yeah. Okay, more interesting, meaning they'd be more serious about the request?
Yes, right. They would be more looking at it more in a democratic point of view.
Yeah. Okay, maybe that, I mean, are you guys okay with that? Dan and Eric?
Yes.
So I have a question, just seeking clarity here because I had to pick up my children today, so I was late. So are you saying that if there is a property that's zoned single family home on the island, that they would be able to go through an appeal process to be allowed to be deemed short-term rental?
Not an appeals process, they'd be able to petition the city council to rezone their property to allow it.
Or would it be to rezone though, Dan? I mean, Buck, or would it be to get a special permit?
Yeah, a special permit is essentially a rezoning.
Okay. Okay, that's what the answer is yes. It would be kind of a,
Yeah, kind of like a special use permit type thing.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like a special use permit.
right. And then Elkie, is that how you pronounce your name? Sorry, I can't see. it.
Yes, yes.
Okay, good.
Elkie.
Elkie, across the rest of the city, if the short-term rental's not agreed to because they've already met the 15% saturation, then there is kind of an appeals process with the city's Board of Adjustments, which is a body that the city council appoints to hear neighborhood-related cases where they can get adjustments on certain Unified Development Code issues. So that board would be the one that we favor in lieu of what other cities might do, which is let the planning or development services staff kind of make an independent judgment case by case. But rather, we would use a Board of Adjustments that has a process similar to planning, wherein they have to notify property owners of the case within a 200-foot radius of the property. And so that information on neighbors' disposition on their request would heavily weigh in. But we're saying don't use that one, use one that's even a little more strict for the island, which would be the city council. So they would be the body that would hear a request to have a short-term rental on the island in RS6 areas.
And does that include Flower Bluff?
No, Flower Bluff would be the DBA side. I mean, the Board of Adjustment side.
So just for clarification, if it's on the island, it's city council. If it's non-island, it's ZBA.
Right, if it's on the island, right now, it sounds like we're saying that city council would be the governing, or the body that an appeals process would be taken to. The rest of the city would be the Board of Adjustment, including Flower Bluff. So let us know what you think, especially the folks that, don't want them on the island. This is, again, from your input, this is one of the reasons we feel real confident in prohibiting them in that RS6 section of the island, because of what we've seen, but because of what we've heard from you, the work group here.
Well, I think that part of the work group was mentioning that we didn't think it should be restricted in, like, that it should be allowed through all of Corpus Christi because, the private property rights on the island. That's, I think, one of the greatest issues that those are in favor of short-term rentals have been trying to communicate.
Ms. Gonzalez, I think you may be misinterpreting property rights. Property rights on both sides of this coin are an issue, not just the people that want to rent out their homes, but the people in the neighborhoods that have property rights, the quiet enjoyment of their property, and the enforcement of the current zoning ordinance. So you just can't look at it one-sided.
No, you can't just look at it one-sided. You have to look at it all. And again, there are property rights that are being diminished for those residents on the island that want to use their home that they own and live in to make revenue off of it.
It's
should they
unfortunate that
so
you don't
choose to.
recognize the R6 zoning has been in effect for a long, long time. And
Yes, and things can change. Things can change and evolve. So I don't really care to get in an argument with you. I'm just stating my points.
well, thank you.
From the survey data that y'all showed in the last meeting, 5 out of the 8 people that responded voted for no restrictions on STRs that I saw. Also, the Padre Island Property Owners Association's own survey, only 10% of the people responded, 10% of their properties, even though they've skewed the slides to make it look like 80% are against it.
So it seems like.
80% of the respondents are against it, not to mention
But only
the
10
ISAC
people
is against
respond,
it.
10% responded.
I'm sorry, Mr. Marvin, let us state our point. What we are trying to say is the survey the Padre Island Association took, 90% of the Padre Island Association members did not respond. 90% did not respond.
Well, that's
Fact
not
one.
correct.
Fact two, sir, you have 5,300 properties under the Padre Island Association, and only 560 responded. So that is 10%, sir, and that is on the city's site. So 10% responded, and out of that 10%, you are saying 80% are against it. Let's not discount the other 90% on the city's site that's listed under the supporting documents. Under the Corpus Christi city site, there is a slideshow that states that 90% did not respond at all to the Padre Island Association survey. Secondly, last meeting that the stakeholders had, there was a slide that showed only 8 out of 17 members responded asking for or against the STRs all over Corpus Christi. Only 5 were for STR all over Corpus Christi, and only 3 voted against it. So second fact is the city's stakeholders voted for STRs. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, but your numbers are wrong. We don't have over 5,000 members. We have about 4,300. And the actual final count of the people that responded was closer to 800. And out of that 800, 80% were against the short-term rentals, and those are the actual facts. Now, the document you're speaking of was forced to be produced to accommodate a timeline before all the votes were counted or all the surveys were counted. But there you have it.
Hey, Dan, can I clarify something? So the type 1 STR, which is where the owner of the home lives in the home, are those, remind me, are those allowed on R6 on the island?
No,
No, right? So no type 1 or type 2 are not allowed on the island.
correct.
That's what's proposed right now. Could look at doing type 1, but that's typically probably most of the ones that have been rented have been, well, we don't know. We don't have data on which ones that have been issues before that, whether they would be type 1 or type 2 under this classification or not, whether they're owner occupied or not. Most likely not.
I would say most of the current STRs on the island that are operating legally in the multifamily or commercial zones would be the type 2 category, where they're renting the whole condo, whole townhome. I doubt we have a whole lot of rooms or accessory dwelling units that are part of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Dan.
So if I can, I'd like to add a comment just to the city staff's recommendation to the city council that the stakeholders committee as a whole is agreeable or suggesting that there's no STR offer, available on the island would be a misrepresentation of the stakeholders committee as a whole, because I don't recall as we voted that was our position. And it seems very unequitable to those STR owner operators on the island as compared to the rest of the city. I mean, at a bare minimum, the density restriction or limit would be applied to the island RS6 as well. That's my opinion.
As would the types, there'd be type 1 and type 2 as well would be applied.
Yeah, Robert, can I just add? Hey, can I just, Robert, I think I agree, at least. I think we agree. So maybe we shouldn't, I was the one that said it, but I haven't been consistent to your all's meetings, but in one or two of the first ones I was in, at least the person speaking seemed vehemently against any type of STR. And we've seen it firsthand with that zoning case that took place, and then the council district representative who we're listening to as well is recommending this. So you're right, we shouldn't say that this work group overwhelmingly supports that recommendation. But when we add up all the persons that are in favor of such an action, including the homeowner association lead, Marvin Jones, that's why we're recommending it. But we'll be careful. Yeah, right, we'll be careful on how we say what this group doesn't support.
And I also feel strongly, as a fellow stakeholder member just stated, that it's been presented from that property owners association that 80% of the homeowners in the RS6 are opposed, and that is simply not the fact based on their own survey. So that's it's represented. There is a lot more resident opposition than there actually is. You know, it's.
I don't think Dan and Eric, we're not using that. Did we do that survey? Is that our survey?
No, it's not our survey.
Okay, well, we won't be using any of that survey material. It's not ours. We didn't commission it, nor do we really have the evidence of it, Robert. So we won't be using that in our presentation, but we can't stop Marvin Jones and his crew from talking about it. But it's not something we're using, just so you know.
Sir, thank you for saying that you will not be using the survey. However, then city should remove it from their STR page where this is listed as the first supporting document.
Okay, can you take a look at that, Dan? I'm not familiar with this. Okay.
We've been just, trying to be transparent with all the information and feedback that we've gotten. So that's what we've done. We pretty much everything that we've received, we've put on our website. All public comments, all emails are all on our website. We just view this as one additional comment or feedback from a particular group. And that's why it was on our website. It's just information. We want to be transparent about all the information that we've got from the public, and we viewed the Padre Island as, is providing feedback on this topic. And that's why it was there for folks to see.
Okay, Dan, great. Thanks for clarifying that. If we don't have a comment or a note on the website, you probably need to put one to say that we don't necessarily agree with these comments, nor are they validated to be accurate. They're just what you said. It's an open forum. As long as something's not breaking the law, we'll allow it to be published, right? But we just need to be transparent about what it is and what it isn't. Because as the lady said, if it's on our website, people are going to think it's true and that we support it.
I think it would be better stated that it was not a city survey, that it was a property owners association survey. And to demean the survey by saying it's not true, I think that's a little over the top, don't you?
Do we know when that survey was conducted?
It's right on the survey. There's a date on the letter.
It's
Can you
just the
share
way
that?
it's presented isn't accurate, because you just show the respondents and you're not showing how many people didn't respond to the survey at all, which could be concluded that, they don't care either way, what STR regulations are.
Dan, just a quick question. Of the people who had provided feedback in support of the STR, was the feedback that they were for a density cap?
I'll have to go back to our responses, but I think there was maybe one or two. I mean, I think for the most part, I think it's either no restriction or basically not at all. So there wasn't a whole lot of middle ground there. And so that's, I think, what we're trying to do with a lot of cities do is find that middle ground of protection of neighborhood rights and not allowing complete saturation. And then, of course, allowing it to occur at some level. So I think most of the feedback that we're getting from the stakeholder group and the public comment is very strongly, it shouldn't be restricted. It should be allowed everywhere. Obviously strong property rights. And then you have the other side where they basically say, no, we shouldn't allow it in our single-family neighborhood. So we're trying to, I think, with this ordinance, develop a middle ground. And I think we're close. A lot of cities, obviously developed something very similar. The buffering, the saturation, this percentage of blocks. So
Sure. And so what would stop like a neighbor to file for an application or a permit and then not use it? And is the city going to be following up on something like that where the house may retain the permit but not be in use?
I think that would probably, we'll be able to make that information available during the appeal process. So what you're saying is someone comes in and tries to capture the percentage within a block and doesn't use the property at all for STR use.
Correct.
Correct. We'll have that information. We'll have, how much they paid, how many nights have been used for that particular property. And so if someone, I think, came in to make a special exception case before the board, that data would be available. Buck, I don't think there's anything we can do to revoke or Michael Dice, I don't think know that there's anything to revoke a permit midstream.
You could have each permit essentially expire yearly, where each person would have to come in and renew it to ensure that they're using it, or something to that effect. I'm not sure. We haven't really delved into that, but there might be remedies.
Is
Yeah,
there
what are the
also the
questions that-
possibility of, I'm sorry, I was just going to ask if there's a possibility of like some kind of 3-strike rule where if someone is issued a permit, but they continue to have noise complaints or, have just issues overall that are not, serving the community in any way, if that permit would be revoked or that would be in jeopardy.
Type of verbiage can be included in the ordinance, yes.
And you may want to have some bullet points on this for tomorrow in the PowerPoint. So that includes the simple thing of how long is the permit for, right? Is it in perpetuity, or does it have to be renewed annually?
And what would be
then,
the fee for that?
What's that, Eric?
I didn't say that. Someone was asking how much the fee would be.
Plus the fee? Okay, good point. That would need to be in there too.
The permit, it's annual $50 as of right now. And Buck, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we did have a provision within the registration ordinance that talked about the violation number and ability to revoke a permit. I don't know if we had 2 issues or it was just 3 issues that you could revoke a permit on a property.
It was 3 confirmed citations.
3 confirmed citations from like code compliance, Michael?
Yeah, so if let's say, for instance, I kind of use this on one of the calls with the STR group. If they were having a bachelor party and they went out for noise and parking and whatever, you could actually incur 3 confirmed citations in one visit.
Okay. And would that be done administratively or through the Board of Adjustments?
The revocation is based administratively on the confirmed.
Okay. And then just, I don't know if others are thinking about this, but if you have a street that wants to kind of not have STRs, it would be easy for them to go get a permit, knowing they're never going to have an STR and reach that 15% saturation. So I think the beginning question kind of alluded to that what if they get a permit but never really use it? And in this case, it's by design so they can block out STRs. Anybody thought of that?
That was always an issue or a potential in San Antonio when we did it, but it never came to fruition.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we're talking about Corpus Christi, not San Antonio, so we can't always fall back on San Antonio as an example. So the city manager asked a great question. We asked the same question 3 meetings ago, and we were told by Dan that this will be something that will be explored in the follow-up meetings, but we have not heard the answer to that. It's very easy for us to anyone to take 2 houses permits on one block, and they've pretty much covered the whole block by getting that. And the city is not going to be providing that data that this person has rented it out for $1, or the revenue generated is 0 for the whole year by those 2 permits. How are we as normal citizens supposed to find out if someone is just sitting on a permit? Because is city going to be releasing that data, how much income they are producing, what hotel taxes are being paid by each face block?
Right, yeah, that's, so you guys, we should add that to the, to our protocol. And the answer is yes, we can tell, because when they register, that they use the same, they're gonna use a similar portal to report occupancy tax. And so if that permit produces zero tax, and maybe if the permit's only good for a year, then it could be revoked in that year. But if it's 6, 7, 8, 9 months into it, and we can tell it's being done just for gamesmanship, then I think the Board of Adjustments would use that information in determining that, okay, we're going to issue another 15%, because these two are fake, fake short-term rentals. I mean, that could be a workaround.
Yeah, that we've kind of talked a little bit about that scenario, and that's, we thought that would just be ammunition for the ZBA to approve that case. If you can identify clearly that the house is not operating, then
Yeah,
you have a pretty strong case to allow more density.
But how are
I mean,
we
you
gonna
could do
do
it like that, right.
This is Andy. I'm sorry I'm on the phone because the audio on the computer is not working so well. It seems to me, I don't really understand. I mean, clearly the issue on the island is what brought this whole issue forward to the city council and why it's being considered now, which is totally reasonable, I guess. But why is there the necessity to put this somewhat heavy-handed regulation of block faces and everything else in the rest of the city? I mean, if we solve the issue on the island, doesn't that really just solve the issue and we can move on without the necessity of this further regulation?
Andy, you said it was Andy?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. My computer audio is not working so well. I can view it online. I just can't get anything.
No worries, Andy. Yeah, while the voices across the rest of the city aren't as loud, there is concern of neighborhood degradation or neighborhood stability in other areas of our town. They're just not as vocal, or it's not as expressed as much as it has been on the island. So we think that the need to preserve neighborhoods across the city is something that merits this across the city approach of the block face at 15%.
And again, type 1, there's no limitation. So if it's owner occupied, there could be the whole block could have them. It's
Right.
the non-owner occupied where the instances of issues occur more frequently.
Right.
But
We have
that's not going to be
heatings, yeah.
allowed on the island though, right? So it's only allowed in certain parts of the city, but not on the island.
At this point in time, correct.
Eric, is there the statement you just made, is there any documentation, any proof of that it's the type 2 in Corpus Christi? Any complaints you have as that we can request access to see?
All that standard would have anything like that. But right now, if they've been operating in single family, they've been operating illegally. So whether they're type 1 or type 2. So if there's any calls for service and locations as to whether they're owner occupied, I don't know that we have that data specifically, but
We were just mentioning that because you had just said that the majority of complaints come from type 2. And
I said I would think the majority would come from non-owner occupied. If there's an owner on site, it's less likely, I would think, most circumstances, that they're going to allow the inappropriate activities to occur that cause a complaint or service calls.
just an assumption then.
To some extent, yes. But that's part of the reason, we're not saying that you can't, that the 15% limits it, yes, to non-owner occupied, but there's no limit if it's owner occupied.
So I'm still hearing that a few minutes ago, Eric or Dan mentioned that we're coming to a middle ground, that's the goal of a fair ordinance. But when you exclude an entire area as large as the RS6 on the island, that's not equally distributed. That's not meeting in the middle in my mind.
I agree.
No, I agree with Robert.
I second that.
And I'm not going to agree or disagree. I'll tell you that there are other ordinances that we looked at that do prohibit them altogether in different zoning districts. College Station, for instance, is one that has 3 different single-family residential areas. I don't know why or how they determined what those areas would be eliminated.
But you're using them as an example.
We
You're
have,
not
that's
sure
typically,
why?
when we're developing ordinances, we want to look at best practices or other instances and other occurrences of municipalities that have utilized the ordinance as a go by, not as a whether it's right or wrong. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not saying whether I agree that the island should be eliminated altogether or not. That's just a suggestion that's there today.
But we're eliminating an entire area where our visitors want to visit and want to stay. And, you know, I operate in the city. All of my guests come and stay with me in the city, but they're here to go to the island and visit the beach. And so it just seems odd for as much of a tourist-oriented island attraction. The beach, the island is our #1 asset, and yet we're going to remove that option as far as in a neighborhood. I get it, we have other STRs and multifamily, but to just black that entire area out, to me, what has been a small, very vocal group is wrong and not equally, it's not being equally distributed to those who want to short-term rent on the
In
island.
terms of supplying inventory for short-term rentals, the Whitecap project is just about to get started, probably by the end of this year. It'll have what, 500, 600, 700 homes or condos in there, some of each, which will all be available for short-term rental, I'm told by the developer. So if you're looking for inventory, there's probably more than can be used in that new development. It'll also be new properties, which will be very attractive, I assume, with the canals and the pools and what have you.
But
So-
Marvin, we're talking about rentals for today. We're talking about residents who want to rent their home today, this summer on the island.
Well, that may be your opinion, but Home Rule has decided that they don't want short-term rentals there on the island. The crime, the traffic, the streets, there's just a whole variety of reasons. And unfortunately, we're spending this entire meeting browbeating the island when there are many other issues to be decided besides the island. And it's unfortunate to waste all the time on that.
It's not, I disagree. This is not a waste of time at all.
I think it's unfortunate for the people who can't rent on the island to continue to do so.
Okay, Robert, you raised a good point, and it's a tough recommendation, no doubt, based on what you just said. I will say though that the design of the island, that RS6 neighborhood is just the streets are very narrow. There is the driveway is very narrow, and when you have numerous vehicles frequenting a home night after night, it's just, that's why that minority population that's very vocal is just at their wits' end. The representative of the island, Councilman Smith, who has a real good pulse of the community, I believe is supportive of this recommendation, and many others are who have come to council to speak against zoning cases and support us, maybe not through this forum, but you know, outside of it in terms of some type of recommendation. You're right. I mean, intuitively, it seems like we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot because we know that on the island, because of supply over the years, there's only 300 hotel rooms. So the majority of the stays are in short-term rentals. But we'll see what the council suggests tomorrow. We do have Councilman Smith and then Councilman Pusley, who as an at-large council member weighs in heavily on this as well. And the mayor as well. I'm not sure of the latitudes point on this, but we know Councilman Smith definitely is supportive of something like this. But we hear you, Robert, and we have to make a decision. We do as staff to recommend something to move forward. So tomorrow's presentation is just that, it's a presentation. We still have 6 weeks of dialogue between tomorrow and the call for the vote on the ordinance, which would be later in June, 6 weeks from tomorrow, 6 weeks from tomorrow. Dan, did you go through all the slides or did you stop on slide 13?
Yeah, I think the only one we missed was the next steps.
But before we leave that last one, is there a sense of the committee as to the need for this block face regulation aspect of the ordinance apart from the debate over the island?
Will you ask that again?
Apart from the debate over the island itself, is there a sense of the committee for or against the ordinance aspect of regulating the densities within the neighborhoods overall other than the island?
I mean, I think I understand the point of like keeping the neighborhoods like culture, or, you know, not changing where Central City, Corpus Christi just turns into tons of Airbnbs everywhere. But I think also the quiz we all took a few weeks ago probably showed what we all thought. I mean, I wasn't for it just because I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow or anytime soon. And I think this is something that could be changed a few years out from now if we see it going in that direction. But I just think it's being early reactive. So I don't think it's a bad thing.
Corpus Christi's number revenue generating stream is tourism. So I think we shouldn't put a cap on 15% cap on short-term rental.
Should we look at staff? Should we look at a higher percentage? And I do think we need some percentage just to regulate the business a little bit and protect, because these are, you know, people buy the home thinking they're going to be in a nice, quiet neighborhood with persons that own them. This is a relatively new phenomenon, relatively speaking. So there has to be some protection of that safeguard of a quiet neighborhood. But is 15% too low then, given that this is a tourism destination? Unlike maybe, I know San Antonio has a lot of tourists as well, but they don't have the bay, they don't have the ocean, they have the Riverwalk. But is that too low maybe? I wonder if we should look at a higher percentage.
I mean, I think you certainly could. I mean, 15% of the block face is kind of, I mean, it says 15% of all single family units in the city could be used for, you know, STR purpose, which we'll never get to that amount. It's kind of just a market supply kind of a situation. I think you could certainly go up, and that would just allow, maybe if you identify areas that become more attractive for it. You know, Flower Bluff, I think, will definitely be a place where you'll see more in single family neighborhoods than other parts of the city, just because of the attraction to the Laguna Madre and, you know, Laguna Shores and that vicinity. I'm already seeing some of the citations, and a lot of them have probably been operating for the last 10 years or more as STRs in some of these single family areas. So that may be an area that we see.
Hey, Dan, could you have a higher percentage, or Eric, on the bluff, on Flower Bluff, as compared to the rest of the city, or does that get into the equity issue?
I think I would recommend staying consistent throughout, because you just don't know the block face links everywhere.
Well, I think we should maybe then, given the comments, look at 20 to 25%. But like you said, Dan, if you took 15% times, how many homes do we have in the city?
I'm not sure. We have probably about 100,000 households, but some of those are apartments.
Let's just take that. So let's just use that. So 150,000 units then, right? Is that what it'd be? Or 15,000? Be 15,000. Yes, 15,000 units. And how many short-term rentals based on that heat map do we do about a year?
Right now we have 842 registered, but, you know, San Antonio, for example, I think has about 2,600. South Padre has about the same, 2,500. So I don't think we'll 3,000 here would be probably pushing it, I bet, as far as the
Right.
maximum number
Right.
that we'd ever get to.
But I think
I have one other comment. One other comment, if you don't mind, and that is, I know there's a pretty heavy enforcement activity going on against those based on the historical entitlements. Is there a need to put a moratorium on that enforcement until these rules get sorted out, such that you wouldn't have somebody being potentially fined or barred from doing this, and then the next week it's now okay?
Yeah, I'm not sure, I don't have your name up here, but this is Peter, the city manager. I already put that, I've already instructed our staff to stop issuing citations. It just doesn't help out.
This is Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I didn't realize we were doing it, but I instructed our staff to not do that. It just doesn't help in the public dialogue right now and in the trust factor. So unless it's an egregious case of something going wrong in an STR, our co-compliance staff has been instructed to not willfully seek out short-term rentals and start citing them.
Peter, does that include the registration ordinance as well?
What do you mean?
Have you instructed the staff not to enforce the registration ordinance?
No, if somebody should be registered and they're trying to get registered, they are. What I'm talking about is seeking out aggressively from the city standpoint, short-term rentals that aren't quote unquote legal, because none of them are, except for the ones that are in zoned areas appropriate. So we're not aggressively, like the headlines that made all papers here last week was that we issued 100 code violations, which became the topic of conversation, which is we're trying to focus on a positive way with the community to develop this ordinance. That's where the attention needs to be, not that we just issued 100 citations for something that's been going on for decades. Right. So we're trying to keep the focus, like Andy said, on the issue, which is let's develop legislation that the city should have done many decades ago. And that's what our focus is right now.
Sir, just wanted to comment on what you said. We know of a family friend that has property in Flower Bluff. She was ticketed, her husband was ticketed, and also the company that they operated under. So for one property, they received 3 tickets.
Yeah, well, okay, we need to review that. I don't have the address, but we can look at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you email, I don't know if you have Dan McGinn or whom the contact is, but email us that location. We'll take a look at it.
I sure will. Thank you.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
And can I ask whom the young lady is that was speaking? I don't know your name.
Hi, Mr. Marvin. My name is Moni. And Mr. City Manager, Peter, I had another comment. If you proposed possibly increasing the I think that would also discourage those homeowners that are trying to take over the whole block by getting permits but not renting them out. So if it is more than 15%, say you go 30%, it will be difficult for a neighborhood trying to block out short-term rentals by buying all of them if it's a higher percentage. But if you stuck with 15%, then it's easy for just for me to apply for 2 permits in one neighborhood if I have 2 properties. So I am in favor of increasing the limit.
Yeah, me too. I think after hearing this conversation, because we have more tourists here, and that would help in the Flower Bluff area, where there's going to be more than 2 on a block face. So in one case, I heard a story from a council member that somebody owned the whole block, and it was nothing but STRs. So there's going to be a lot of Board of Adjustment cases, even though the number would be something that that would be too much in terms of supply. At least it would help those areas where we know there's more than 2 or 3 on the street. So we're going to look at after this conversation, and we'll decide for tomorrow whether it's 20 or 25%. I would pick one of those 2, Dan and Eric.
I nominate 30%.
That wasn't an option.
Dan, real quick, we were talking about confirm compliance. Who is the one, or what entity would be the one going out to confirm those?
Well, Michael, I don't know if you want to chime in here, but there's going to be several departments that will be issuing the permits. And so they'll have software that will identify where there's existing permits already issued, and they'll have mapping software that will be all part of that process. And then, of course, code enforcement will be involved. I don't know if you want to elaborate on how you envision that process to work, Michael, but we do have software that will be able to assist with this process.
Yeah, the MUNIRevs software that's currently in process will be able to identify, it scrubs all the different platforms and identifies short-term rentals by their registration, and then code enforcement would handle. They actually send out mailers, and then code enforcement would handle any.
So code enforcement would be the one to confirm if there's a complaint on a property.
At this point, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Would the city consider perhaps a density for the island, considering that families that travel would like to stay on the island because it's such a tourist attraction area? Maybe not as high as 30%, maybe not even the 15%, but some percentage, so that you could have some property owners take advantage of those property rights?
I was just about to say that as well, Elke. If we're allowing it everywhere else, could there just be a smaller percentage? I mean, right now, people were mad because it's so uncontrolled. Like now we're putting control on this. So is that something we can talk about?
And Elke, you bring up a good point in that, let's not forget 90% did not vote either way. So I'm not sure why the city, I would say, is focusing on, well, the 10% or the 20% that did vote in the Padre Island Association, only their voice matters. The ones that didn't vote, their voice should also matter, that they don't care if there is short-term rent. So let's make that 10-20% of those that voted on the survey the focus for the entire island.
I just clarify here just one more time that we've had, they're not just only the stakeholder group, but there's been some town hall meetings on the island. I'm the liaison to the ISAC that meets monthly. Some of the information provided to PIO is just a piece of all the feedback that we've received from the island. And so a lot of the public comments that we have on the sheet that is on our website is from residents of the island. So and of course, we've talked to the council member that represents this area. So all that feedback and information, it's not only just the survey that's provided to us by the POA. There's a lot more information and feedback that has been provided to city staff in leading to the recommendation about the island. So I know we keep kind of harping on this survey, but it's not something that we focused on.
That's a good point, Dan. The town halls that you referenced, what would you say is a predominant sentiment from those folks?
Yeah, exclude STR use in the single family area.
Okay, right. And what would you say, what is the sentiment of the ISAC, the nearly 20-member citizen committee that kind of guides stuff down there? Are they in support of them?
I wouldn't say they have not voted on the issue, but a majority, I think, would be in favor.
Dan, that's not right. The ISAC did vote on it, and they voted against short-term rentals in the RS6. And they also voted for more stringent enforcement. So you might have to go back over a year when that vote was taken, but it was definitely against short-term rentals.
Okay, Marvin, thank you. Yeah, that's good. I just wanted, that's what I was saying earlier, is that it's not just one piece of information that the city staff has used with our consultant to make this recommendation, but rather a collection of factors to include the councilman, these town hall meetings, the ISAC's input, Marvin Jones representing the majority of those homeowners in his property owners association, and this group. We're listening to what you all say as well. There was one person in the beginning when we first had these meetings that was very opposed to them, but we still do have to decide on what percent we use, at 15 or a greater number, but All right.
Peter, I'd like to bring one other item to your attention, and that is the ability to use hotel-type rules to have non-resident occupants escorted out of the property who are causing trouble, so that there's some sort of intervention at the time of bad behavior as a way to address the neighborhood issues. That seems to be something that is available to the city. I brought it up since February. I'd like to see a written policy from the enforcement group along those lines, so that people engaging in the bad behavior and the operators of the vacation rentals can get on the same page, as well as whatever's necessary, conforming training with the police, let's say, so that this can be seamlessly part of the official policy.
And I'm not sure the reference to the hotels or what have you, but I don't know enough about it to say, yes, let's do that or not. It sounds like it would take a lot of legal review from somebody to.
There's other cities that are doing it. I'll send you a memo. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, send us some detail. We can look at it. I don't think we're going to have it done by the June time when we approve this, when we ask the council to approve this ordinance, but we can look into it.
Andy, are you saying that if people in a STR are misbehaving, loud noise, partying, whatever, police can evict them from the property? Is that what you're saying?
That is my proposal, that be the standard, because they're non-resident occupants. In the current situation, let me just give you some examples. Let's say that somebody is behaving badly, parking, noise, or otherwise. The police show up. They're going to say, in their experience, to remove somebody from the property requires eviction, which is obviously a court process that takes a month. I think that there's an alternative that's available to the city such that they can be escorted out of the property in the same way that hotels have the right to address misbehavior by getting rid of the people right then and there.
I think you got some real legal hurdles to overcome there.
It's Port Aransas does it, for example.
Okay.
And there's other cities that I've been told that do it as well. Somebody mentioned that the Frio River area does it. So I think it's pretty well established. If you look at the case law, the only standard is that the person does not intend to occupy that space as a permanent resident. That's the standard. So if the documentation and the set of rules that they've agreed to align with that standard, then there should be the relief of being able to get rid of them off the property in short order. Just like, which is the same standard the hotels use. And it doesn't revolve around zoning or classification. It revolves around whether that person considers that their residence.
Right. This is Alex Harris. Andy, I agree with you. We've kind of talked about this in the some of the rental management companies, because they don't operate hotels and they operate short-term rentals. This little bit of a change in the ordinance will really help them keep control of anything that's going on in any of those rental properties, because it gives them something to tell people about. You know, there is an ordinance that says you can be evicted by the police by acting up. And I think it would be real important if we can look at that during this particular time.
I agree. And I think if you have something like that in place, it may put a lot of the island residents at ease. If they know that that something like this will be enforced, then they would be able to, maintain peace and quiet in their neighborhood.
And I think if you're going to have somewhat of a death penalty on the operators, if a certain number of citations are involved, then it's a very important tool so that they have control over their own facilities as well. This could address overstays, over occupancy, parking, noise, everything. I think it's fairly fundamental to getting it right, because quiet enjoyment is ultimately the standard that I think that we as a city should aspire to. I also think that this is a necessary part of the discussion, because it's more about
all the short-term rentals, whether that be in the multifamily or otherwise. And certainly short-term rentals are going to be part of the future of the city. So addressing it is fairly important in my view. Thank you.
So you're talking about a civil removal, not a criminal charge, am I correct?
To the same standard that the hotels use, yes.
Well, that's a civil standard. Because they own the property, you're on their property, they're there, and they declare you trespassing, so they can kick you out, have the police physically remove you. It'd be a little different in a short-term rental where the owner wasn't there, but I'll look.
But the owner can be there in very short order. And oftentimes it's the owner who's the one that's reporting the problem.
Yeah, oftentimes the owners don't live in the city even, but let me check with Porter Menzies. I'll talk to the chief over there and see what he has to say, how they do it. Be interesting.
Yeah, I'll check with our police chief here too, because couldn't the STR hire a security firm? It sounds like, I'm just trying to think of the high profile, the sense of urgency for a case that our police officers get called to.
I don't even think it's a security firm. I think responsible management can be there in 5 minutes.
Andy, I'm talking about the action of sending an officer to a house because somebody's had too much to drink and the STR owner who's making money off the deal is not, they should be handling it. But I have to see, how does this, the chief has to tell me, how does this rank in terms of a priority call? If we have a homicide in action or some type of domestic violence, where somebody's lives at stake, I'm not sure they're going to rush to a call like this. But we'll find out. We'll ask our police chief and see what he thinks. And maybe my point about the security firm was an STR operator maybe they call a security company. I wonder if that could result in the same eviction.
It's the constable that manages the process in Port Aransas.
Okay.
No, all right.
But I would like to believe it's the sense of this committee that this is an important aspect that's not a function of where it should not be allowed in the city, but is an important part of a coherent and comprehensive regulation of this issue.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Okay, that was all the questions. I still don't know that we covered this last slide. Just this is our proposed schedule moving forward. We talked about we have a briefing tomorrow with the council. We're going to be going over the same presentation and again with the planning commission Wednesday night, and then we plan to post a video and have the draft ordinance on that project website that we talked about. We're going to put a deadline in place just so we can get all the feedback from the public and kind of summarize it and have that available for planning commission and council. So we really need to have a deadline. We also like to have those comments in place because we're planning right now tentatively to present the final kind of ordinance to this group on June 10th. And then we're scheduled tentatively now for a planning commission on June 15th and a June 28th ordinance reading with the council. So that is the proposed schedule here for the next couple of weeks.
Dan, the June 6th, the deadline, I know we went over this, but I'm trying to make sense of it here. The deadline to receive public comment, what does that mean? Because public comment,
well, on our project website, when we post that video and the draft ordinance, we'll just put a little caption down there that, if anyone has additional comments, we'd like to wrap it up by June 6th, just so we can have that information available to the stakeholder group, and then summarize that and include it with the planning commission packet as well, just so they have all that material. But we can obviously we'll take feedback up and through the meetings. We always do. Obviously, folks can come to the public hearing.
Yeah, you need to qualify that June 6th. It's the deadline for city staff to receive public comment, because the planning commission they take comment, and so will the council all the way and on the day of June 28th. So you just need to add some more words to it so people don't think that nobody's going to listen to the public anymore after June 6th. the planning commission will, and the city council will, and we will too. It's just that you're saying, summarize the comments that staff receives. That June 6th would be a preferred time to get them in by, right? I wouldn't even call it deadline, because it's not true. You're gonna get comments, I'm gonna get comments all the way up to June 28th. It's not like we're not gonna listen to them, we will be, so.
Sure.
Probably need to rephrase that a little bit. Yes, sir, thank you.
Dan, this is Alex Harris again. On that slide number 8, where you showed kind of the areas on the island, hopefully you'll be able to go back. There are some areas, even when I look at it, that have multifamily in there. So I just hope that we can add something on that slide to say that if there are particular areas that already have multifamily, those will be excluded from the RS6 area.
Sure. Yeah, this was intended as kind of general, but we'll use language within the ordinance that will specifically state the RS6 zoned areas. So that will be kind of the trump any kind of map that gets produced. But that, but I understand. This was
I hate
just
for
kind of,
someone to come back and go, hey, wait a minute, they're inside that yellow box. They can't do short-term rental.
Alex, I don't know if you were tuned in, but I did make that comment and asked them to
Right.
rejigger their map a little bit.
Yeah, and Marvin's got a pretty good idea of what areas are the multifamily, so he could probably mark off pretty quick to help you there. Dan. Yes, sir.
I have them all. Thank you. All right, I think we've covered everything we intended to today. Is there any additional questions or comments?
Hey, Dan, I guess, not to belabor this point, but I guess you could keep the presentation at 15%, but add a couple of bullets to say, based on today's meeting, alternate densities could be considered up to, I don't know, you could say up to 25% or beyond maybe, right?
Yeah, we could add a slide and an image to kind of show what that looks like. You know,
Yeah.
here's the 15%, here's what 30% looks like, and create an image that basically, well, you double, of course. We can do that.
Yeah. Or the other thing is, I think really I think the only place where you might need it is really Flower Bluff. So while we are looking for consistency in how we apply this, maybe it's a higher threshold for that peninsula versus the rest of the city, excluding the island, you know? Because it doesn't make sense to have a huge percentage that's never gonna get used anyway. But we know it probably will on the Bluff, but just some thought.
Yep.
Okay.
Peter, it's Alex. On that 15%, the people that are in town that are already doing short-term rental out of their home, whether they're with the residents and in one of the apartments that they have behind it, will they have priority on being able to register, you know, if we've got this 15% or something to do with their block? Because they're already up and going, and I hate for 4 people to register and then all of a sudden they've been up and going a year and now they can't register.
Yeah, so if they're living in the home, Alex, then it's a type 1 and there's no, you can have it. There's no threshold requirement.
Okay.
You know, if you have an auxiliary dwelling in the back, those have no threshold. But the answer is that it would be based on first come, first served basis.
Okay.
That's the way we're recommending it today. So what you're saying could happen, that could happen. But I guess the fix would be they could go to the Board of Adjustment.
Right. Well, they just
Yeah.
need to pay attention to what's going on in their city.
Exactly, yeah, and hopefully they get in first, and if not, then I think that Board of Adjustment. This is something, again, folks, this is something that the city has not dealt with when most major cities have legislation on the books. So we're doing it finally, which is good, but as with any ordinance and any new policy, there's always an opportunity to revise it, to modify it up to the point where it's adopted, and then even after. This doesn't mean this is going to be it and we can never adjust it again, you know, so there's going to be things that we learn. There's going to be things that didn't work well here based on best practice. But that doesn't mean everybody on this WebEx is gone tomorrow and we're never going to look at this again. So we're very open to input from the community. This is a tough job in that we try to do the best that two parties have very different opinions on. But we need some guiding policy to protect those that want to be protected and let those want to have a business have a business. So my point is that this is a beginning point. We're glad we're here. We're glad we're working with the community, and we'll continue to work with you to make it better as things move forward and as we learn from it. Right. So that's a key message for you all to know. We care on both sides, and we're here to work with both sides. So
I think everyone have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric.